In 2023, during the era of Max Verstappen dominance, it's difficult to believe that anyone else will win a world championship. However, everything could change in 2024 or in 2026 when the new engine regulations come into effect. So, I thought it would be fun to go through each of the drivers on the 2023 grid and say whether or not I think they ever have a chance of being world champion. So this is only for the drivers who don't currently have one, so I'm not going to be talking about Max, Lewis, or Fernando in this video. As usual, I'm going to do this via a tier list. Okay, so I've organized this into 6 categories: a yes, conditional yes, slim, need a miracle, too early to tell, and no. First up, for the nose, I'm going Logan Sargent. I honestly just think that he's not likely to survive the 2023 season, and even if he does, I haven't seen anything from him to say that he has the talent to be a world champion. He hasn't been terrible by rookie standards, but he hasn't really done anything to impress either. Next up for the nose, I have Kevin Magnussen. Honestly, Haas is where your career goes to die. You're either a rookie who can't hack it, or you are a veteran who no one else will ever take a chance on. And unfortunately, Kevin falls into that second category. I don't think he'll ever get a chance at a top team, and he seems perfectly happy at Haas, but I cannot see Haas nailing the regulations in a million years. So similarly, I have Nico Hülkenberg down there. At this point, I think he's too old to be picked up by a top team. He definitely has the qualifying pace, as has been proven this year. He's done very well to get into Q3 quite frequently, but he's never really had the racecraft to even get a podium in F1, so it would be tough for him to get a world championship as well. Next up is Zhou Guanyu for the nose. I think Zhou has what it takes to be a very consistent midfielder for a few years. He also comes with a lot of backing from China, which, as long as they're not in a recession, would be very appealing to a team at the back of the grid that's struggling financially. Although with the cost cap now, I'm seeing that the so-called pay drivers are becoming less and less frequent as teams are able to spend to the cap. And while Zhou is a good midfield driver, I just don't think he has the pace to be picked up by a top team. I think it's more than likely that he'll be dropped before Audi come in to take over, where Audi would have much more of a chance of doing something spectacular with the regulations. Next up, I have Valtteri Bottas. Bottas's time has passed in F1. He had his opportunity with Mercedes and just wasn't as good as Lewis Hamilton. I've also felt that his motivation has seemed to be slipping, and I really don't see him being re-signed by Alfa Romeo or Audi after his current contract is finished. At this point, I honestly feel like he will retire pretty soon here and become a full-time cyclist. It just seems to me like he's getting way more enjoyment out of that at the moment, and being able to do what he wants to in his free time. He's kind of gotten the way of a Kimi Räikkönen at this point, just kind of biding his time and enjoying driving the car, but not really pushing for much more than that. All right, next up in the nose, I have Yuki Tsunoda. Everybody loves Yuki, myself included, but I've honestly always kind of questioned how seriously he's taking F1 and whether he has the mental fortitude to be able to get it done. Yuki can be extremely quick, but he often makes silly mistakes. He's definitely improved on that this year, but they do still seem to creep in from time to time, and those are the kinds of mistakes that can cost you championships. He's done pretty well in a terrible AlphaTauri car, but he's honestly looking a little at risk this year if he's not able to beat Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo. Both of them are also vying for that AlphaTauri seat for 2024. I also think that with Honda moving on to Aston Martin, I think Yuki has lost his in for the Red Bull seat, and I don't think even with that Red Bull were ever really considering Yuki for that second seat, with them likely opting for an older, more experienced Ricciardo. And so I see Yuki's window closing. There's a lot of chatter around him possibly being an option for Aston Martin, kind of coming into the new regulations with that Honda partnership. But honestly, I think once Fernando retires, I see them going for a bigger fish like an Oscar Piastri or a Charles Leclerc or a Lando Norris over Yuki. Next up in the nose for me is Esteban Ocon. Esty Bestie has never gotten a shot at a top team, and sadly, I don't think Alpine ever will be that top team. They just do not have the investment or the people within their organization required to get this done. I believe that this is why Ricciardo, Alonso, and Piastri all left. They just do not see the ambition within that team to become a front runner again. Esteban has also only beat a teammate once, and it was in 2022 with Fernando, which is quite impressive. But then if you look at the stats a bit further, it's pretty clear that Fernando had a lot more reliability issues with that car. And so can you really say that Esteban beat him? So at this point, if he doesn't beat Pierre this year or in 2024, it might mark the end of his career in F1. I think at that point, I think Alpine would take a shot at a Doohan or a Martins over re-signing SD. There was some chatter a few years back about him potentially taking over that second seat at Mercedes if Lewis ever decided to retire, but it's looking less and less likely that Lewis will retire at this point. And also, I think there are bigger fish that Mercedes would go for now, and so I don't think Esteban is really on that list anymore. And similarly, I have Pierre Gasly as a no. Unfortunately, Pierre has had that opportunity at a front runner when he got the Red Bull seat for the first half of 2019, but I think that stint just showed that he doesn't quite have what it takes to be consistent and have the more mental fortitude to be able to make a championship bid. He has definitely grown and matured as a person and driver since then, but sometimes that just puts a red letter on your ledger, and it's tough to make people change their minds about you. I think similar to Esteban, there was a slim chance that he would go to Mercedes if they wanted more of like a Bottas style driver to partner George when Lewis retires. But as I was saying with Esteban, like, it's more likely that one of the two of them is going to get dropped at the end of 2024, and Pierre and Esteban seem pretty even, so we could never really know which way that might go. But yeah, I think for Pierre it just comes down to Alpine not being a championship contender and him probably going to be passed over for any opportunities in the future. The last no on my list, Sergio has unfortunately proven in his 3 years at Red Bull that he does not have what it takes to compete with Max. He can be quite quick on a street track on his day, but on the purpose-built tracks, he just cannot keep up with Max and cannot get the most out of that car. I've given him the highest chance within all of the no's purely because he is in that top team, and there's a chance that he'll stay on there for 2024. But even if there was a miracle in 2024, I don't see Red Bull having the same gap to the other teams that they do this year. And for that reason, I think another team would have a driver finish ahead of him, even if the Red Bull was still the quickest car, and even if Max was somehow out of the equation. So it's just, I can't see it, sadly. And after his stint at Red Bull is up, I don't see him getting another opportunity at a top team. Alright, next up in Too Early to Tell, Liam Lawson. Honestly, the only reason why I have him here is just that he's had 2 races. You can't say anything about him after those 2 races. He's also in the worst car on the grid, and while he's impressed in his 2 races, I think there is a little bit of a learning curve there still for him, and we just can't tell anything about him. It's more than likely that he'll be a no, just because he has taken a while to get that seat. If he was a true talent, he would have got in right away, but we haven't seen enough from him to know whether he could be or could not be. So it's not to say that he's like better than all the drivers in the nose, it's just, yeah, we can't tell. All right, moving on to the Need a Miracle category. This might partially be biased, but I have Daniel Ricciardo there. I've always had a feeling that he will make it back to the Red Bull team one way or another, either for 2024 or 2025. Really can't know for sure, but I just have a feeling that he's gonna get that seat. It seems like Red Bull are really pushing for a Lando or for an Oscar or someone else who's a little bit younger, but I feel like that will be more likely going into like the new engine regs. So I think the 2024-2025 season is when Daniel might get his seat back at Red Bull. I think one of the reasons why Red Bull is leaning that way is because in the past he has been the only driver who has been able to keep up with Max. Now, this was a version of Max that was younger, far less experienced, and way more accident prone, so who's to say that Daniel will still be able to keep up with him? But I think at this point, the pedigree is there, and so I think there is a chance that he could be within reach of Max and be able to qualify P2 at most race weekends. And if that's the case, you never know what could happen, and he would have a better opportunity of going for that title if he's not like a Checo battling from P5, P6 every single week, allowing Max to just race off into the distance. So the reason why it's Need a Miracle is any chance that Daniel has is probably me just being Delulu, because it would still require Max's car to spontaneously combust on several occasions, I think, and that doesn't seem to happen very much with these cars anymore. So unless Daniel is willing to fully commit himself a la a Nico Rosberg, I don't think it will happen as much as I really, really, really want it to. Like, really, really want it to. But yeah. And then there's still it'll still probably require a miracle for Daniel to even get that seat. So it's a stretch. It's a very, very large stretch, but Daniel has had the pedigree in the past to be able to do it, and so I think I can't put him straight in no, because I just think there's enough evidence there that it's a possibility. We will always have Monaco 2018 though. Now the next driver in Need a Miracle, which I think will be quite shocking to a lot of people, is I have Lance Stroll. And bear with me here. Lance did prove in 2020 with the pink Mercedes that even in a good car, he doesn't have the ability to be consistent. And he has had flashes of brilliance. He got that pole in Turkey, and he's had a few podiums here and there, but we haven't seen the commitment from him to be able to do that. He also is way off the pace of Alonso. So as long as Alonso's at that team, Lance has no chance. So I think Alonso will be around for at least the end of 24, potentially the end of 25, before the new regs kick in 2026. Now here's the thing. If Lance is still around going into 2026, I think that with that Honda partnership, Aston Martin has a very strong chance of being a very, very good car going into those new engine regs. And if Aston Martin decide to go with a younger, less experienced driver, such as a Felipe Drugovich, or I'd split ball in here, like a Wasa or a Vesti. If they do that and Lance is the number one driver at that team and they pull a Braun, you just never know what could happen. I do believe that one team will probably come out of that new regs as having a superstar engine and a superstar car, and if that happens and it's Aston Martin, I think Lance has a chance. It's wild to say that, and it would need a miracle. It would require that all the other teams foul up. Like, I don't think he has the talent on his own without major help to be able to get it done, but I do think the potential is there. So that's why I have him in Need a Miracle. Wild, I know, but that's just how I think that could go. Of course, if Aston Martin do decide to go with a better driver like a Lando or a Charles or something as their other driver, Lance has no chance. He has to be against a rookie teammate to be able to get it done. Now we're moving into the slim category. And there, I first have Alex Albon. It's so wild how much things can change in Formula One. Looking at Alex now compared to where he was in 2021, it's incredible. It's quite a turnaround. Now, I don't see Williams ever being a top team again unless they're allowed to update their outdated systems. So if he does stick around Williams, I don't see this happening. However, of all of the drivers on the kind of midfield backmarker teams, I think Alex's stock right now is the highest. And so he might be the driver that's first in line for any opportunity that opens up at a top team if other drivers like a Lando or a Charles decide that they want to stay where they're at. Alex also did quite well at Red Bull, at least in his first half year at the team, before a couple spins caused by Lewis Hamilton kind of completely destroyed his confidence, and then his 2020 year was not great. And it's very difficult to say what his pace is like in that Williams because it's so difficult to compare him to other drivers. So you can't really say whether or not he would be a number 1 or number 2 at a top team if he went up against a George or a Charles. So you can't really know, but I think his chances are a little higher than Lance and Daniel's, and I think that the fact that he seems to have a lot of stock in him right now, if a spot opened up and he took advantage of it, I think it could happen. Now, the other driver I have in Slim is Carlos Sainz. Now, this is also a bit of a stretch, but this is kind of the sequence of events that I could see that would cause this to happen. I think if Sainz stays at Ferrari, even if they make the best car, I think he's going to lose to Charles in any scenario in which the car is really good. Charles has more pace and can take a car to places that I don't think Carlos can, and so I think Carlos would lose out to Charles in that situation. However, at this point, it's looking more and more likely that he won't be re-signed at Ferrari past 2024. If you've looked around Twitter at all, there seems to be something happening that's being hidden behind PR, and it just seems like the team just does not like Carlos, and the fans all seem to always side with Charles, and it's just, there's something lurking under there, and I don't know if he's going to be re-signed at Ferrari. However, Carlos does have a lot of connections to Audi through his dad, and I think Audi also has a good shot at developing a really strong car for the 2026 regs. So they might look at signing Carlos as the number 1 driver, and if they do nail the regs, then he would have a chance at a championship. I think that is the most likely scenario that would allow him to get that WDC. The problem he might run into, though, is also that Audi might want to also sign someone else strong, like a Lando, Oscar, or Charles. And if that happens, I think Carlos once again will not quite have the pace to be able to take a driver's championship from those drivers. I think Carlos is a very strong, very consistent driver, but I just don't think he has that high echelon talent to get it done. All right, next is conditional yes. So these are drivers that I do think will win a championship if they make a single decision. But the fact whether or not they make that decision is very, very up in the air. And so the first driver I have in this category is Lando. Lando is extremely loyal to McLaren, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. He has been offered a second seat at Red Bull several times and turned it down several times. He does not want to be a number 2 to Max, even though the Red Bull is the best car, which is valid, but there's several issues with that. I think one side of the issue is very positive. McLaren has impressed since they've brought those new upgrades, and they are a little bit ahead of the curve of other teams, such as a Ferrari or Mercedes, who are going to have to take a little bit of a step back going into 2024. So if McLaren can make use of their wind tunnel time and their new wind tunnel, I think they have a chance of challenging for wins in 2024 and maybe even a championship in 2025. It's a slim chance, but I think the chance is there. However, I do not see McLaren being competitive going into the 2026 engine regulation changes, mainly because they are the only top team that does not have an exclusive engine deal with the manufacturer. They are a customer team, And so they're always going to be at a disadvantage to a Mercedes or an Aston Martin or whatever other team that they share an engine with. So I don't see McLaren being able to get that championship after 2026. So it's basically 2025 or bust. And since Lando is so loyal to McLaren, I don't know if he will be able to get it done unless he leaves that team. I truly believe that Lando is one of the strongest drivers on the grid. I think he has the talent, he's very quick, he's very consistent, and he's also not prone to mistakes. And I think he has that combination to be able to put a championship winning year together. But he also has the issue of sticking with McLaren, and if they don't get it done in 2025, that's the year his contract ends. And if he sticks with McLaren, I don't think they're going to nail the engine regs. But he also has the issue of if he decides to leave, it's basically a lottery of which team to go to, because you're not going to know who the best engine manufacturer is. My personal opinion, the likely best engines are going to be Mercedes, Aston Martin, or Audi. That's where my head's at. And if Lando picks one of the three and they don't end up being the ones to nail it, then that could cause huge problems for him. It's like someone going into the new engine regs is going to be Lewis Hamilton and pick the right team. And I think Lando has a 1 in 3 chance of being that. So it's very tough. It's conditional on him either having a chance in 2025 with McLaren or choosing the right team for the new regs. And that's the condition that Lando has. I think he has the talent. He just has to pick the right team. And so, similar to Lando, the other driver I have in conditional yes, as much as it pains me to say it, is Charles Leclerc.
Lando, we can be world champion, I said. Please, Lando. Lando!
Similar to Lando, Charles is a Ferrari merchant. I don't see him ever leaving that team unless they drag him out kicking and screaming and eject him from the country of Italy. And even if they do, I think the fans will riot. They love him so much for good reason. And unless it starts to turn on him like it kind of did with Vettel, I just don't see that man ever leaving that team. So at this point, it's looking quite likely that Charles will re-sign with Ferrari. His current contract is until the end of 2024. So if he signs a new one going into the new engine regs, it depends on if Ferrari can develop a good engine, but I do have faith that they can do that. The issue with Ferrari, as per usual, is the culture of the team and the operations of the team. That all depends on whether Fred is able to implement the changes that he wants at that team and how much faith you have in him to do that. For me, I always have hope. You have to have hope to be a fan of Ferrari, but it's just not likely. They haven't been able to do it for 15 years, so why would it change now? I want it to happen for him at Ferrari so bad. So bad, but I don't think it will. And I think Charles has to leave to win the WDC, and I don't know if he ever will. I don't think he will. But if they do kick him out, and he joins a team that nails the regs post-2026, I think he has the talent. Similar to Lando, he just needs the right car. I think Charles also will probably be the top of the list for any team with a driver leaving. So a Lewis retiring, a Alonso retiring, or a Valtteri retiring will open up a spot at a team that has the potential to do well going into 2026. And so if Charles does leave Ferrari, I think he will have the pick of the litter. And so that is the most likely scenario for him. Charles, you need to get over your Stockholm syndrome, man. You need to do it. Like, come on, please. I love you at Ferrari. I can't see you anywhere else, but it's just not gonna happen. So that is the condition for Charles. He needs to leave Ferrari. So that means that in the yes category, I have Oscar Piastri and George Russell. Oscar is probably a bit of a shock for you, and I can see why. He is just a rookie. He has just started in F1. How on earth could I have this amount of confidence that Oscar will be a world champion? But here's the thing with Oscar. He has already proven that he will be ruthless in going after what he wants. How he got himself out of that Alpine situation and into McLaren is a sign that this man has killer instinct. That is something that I think that a lot of other drivers on this grid do not have, including Lando. And I think this killer instinct is also something that World Championship drivers have. You see it in Max, you saw it in Michael Schumacher, you see it in Alonso, and you see it in Lewis. Oscar has that dog in him. So I think Oscar right now also has started to pose quite the threat to Lando. We saw this a little bit at the recent Italian Grand Prix. He got a little screwed by the strategy and he wasn't gonna let it just go over. He really pushed to try and get that position back. So if McLaren do manage to design a good car with a little bit more experience, he's going to be very, very close to Lando. And so it's not a guarantee that Lando will be the one to get that WDC if McLaren have a good car. It could be Oscar as well. But the other big differentiator between him and Lando is that Oscar doesn't have that loyalty to McLaren that Lando does. I think if a spot opens up at a top team, at a Red Bull, at a Mercedes, at a Ferrari, Oscar is going to jump all over it. I think he will go for the better team. He is not tied to McLaren. I think if Lando turns down a seat at Red Bull for 2026, I think Oscar might be one of the people to go for that. And then you really don't know. Oscar has proven to be a very good driver, and his junior series accomplishments prove that. So that is why I have him in yes and not Lando, is because I think Oscar will make the right career decisions to be able to get that WDC. And then the other driver I have in yes is obviously George Russell. I don't think that George is the most talented driver on the grid. Honestly, I think I would have Charles and Lando and maybe even Oscar above him in terms of talent. However, George is in that Mercedes seat, and that is the biggest reason why I think he's the most likely to win out of all of the drivers who do not currently have a driver's championship. Lewis is eventually going to retire, father time catches up with everyone, and George is a strong enough driver that I think he'll stick around at Mercedes for a while. And I think George is also smart enough to not push against Lewis too hard in Lewis's quest for 8. So if there is an opportunity, obviously George will push for it, but I don't think he wants to go the way of a Nico and piss Mercedes off enough that he is booted from the team. Now that isn't what happened with Nico, but I feel like that would have eventually been the case if that had been allowed to continue. I think the biggest hindrance for George is going to be who Mercedes hires to replace Lewis once he does retire. If it is a Charles or a Lando, I think George might have a tougher time because, as I mentioned, I think they are stronger drivers than him. But if they go for a younger driver such as a Vesti or a Mick Schumacher, then I think George has a very, very good chance to get that WDC. Because I think Mercedes have shown in the past that they can nail an engine reg change, and they know what they're doing, they know how to do it. Toto knows what he's doing, and so I think going into 2026, I have the most faith in Mercedes getting it done out of any of the other teams. So I just can't see how George wouldn't get that driver's championship going into the new reg. Overall, one of the biggest things that I think for these new regs is that I do not think at this point that Red Bull is going to be one of the teams to nail it. I mentioned this a little bit in the Daniel Ricciardo section, but Red Bull will no longer have the backing of Honda going into the new regs. They have probably built up some knowledge base there, but they won't have the backing of that operation. They will have the backing of Ford, but Ford has not raced in F1 for a very, very long time. And so I am thinking that it is much more likely that that relationship is going to go more so the way of a Honda than a Mercedes going into the new engine regs. Now, if this doesn't happen and I have to eat my words, I will be very sad about it because that might bring about more Max Verstappen dominance. But I think that will be the thing to stop Max Verstappen, is the new engines. And Red Bull have already started to complain about where they're going with the new engine regulations, which makes me think that they already know that they are going to be behind the 8 ball for that. So things are going to get wide open in those new engine regs, and I think there are going to be a lot of drivers who don't have a championship who will be in championship battles, and it could be extremely interesting. But yes, this is how I see these drivers at this point in 2023. So let me know in the comments down below if you disagree with any of my takes. Do I have some drivers with too big of a chance, too little? Let me know. Also, if there are any F2 drivers that are coming up that you think could also have a chance. I didn't really mention any of them, but I feel like a Behrman is someone who might come in, a Vesti is someone who might come in, maybe even a Pourchaire, but I was only considering the F1 drivers, so let me know what you think down in the comments down below. So that is it for this one. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and want more of this kind of content from me, and hit subscribe if you want to watch any future videos that I put out. So yeah, I'll catch you later. Bye.